Hi, Jen.
Hi, Bethany. We have an awesome guest on today. We have Rachel Somerstein. She is a journalist, a professor, and author of Invisible Labor, the untold story of the cesarean section. She literally wrote a book about C-sections, so I can't think of a more perfect guest to have on the show. So welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much for having me.
There's so many things that I want to get into with you. I wanted to talk about your book, but really what started this whole journey for you, of course, was your first birth. You've had 2 babies now. How old are your kids?
4 and 9.
Your first birth was an unplanned C-section. If it's okay with you, I want to get into that whole story, maybe just starting with what your mindset was, because I know there's been so much of a perspective shift for you over the years and writing the book and probably even since you've written the book. So bring us into your mind during your pregnancy, kind of what you had done to prepare for your birth and what you were thinking at that time.
So if you'd asked me at the time, I was 33 and I got pregnant, I should say, like, my joke was I should go and talk to high school students and be like, it only takes one. So I got pregnant much faster than I expected. And that is relevant because I was in the second year of my job as an assistant professor and I didn't have that much leave accumulated, which is I'm in New York State. There's different regulations now, but that was like a big source of stress for me when I was pregnant. And I would have said that I had done a ton of research and I was really well prepared. I read a lot of books. I was like doing some of these online mom, February 2016 birth group. And I really thought I knew a lot. And I thought that I would easily have an unmedicated vaginal birth, meaning like no epidural. I was not, what I now know is I was totally unprepared, first of all, for a C-section, which I'm sure that you both would probably agree with me. I mean, just the sheer number of people who have C-sections every year, everybody should be prepared for one, whether it's
should at least be considered, right, as a possibility.
Exactly. As opposed to like, I literally skipped those parts of the book. So I was like, not me, not me. I don't need to read this. Not going to happen. And I also really did not have a plan. And I don't mean a plan meaning like, I want this and I want this and I want this, but I mean some kind of understanding for myself of, okay, if you're not going to have medicine to treat the pain, how are you going to cope with the pain?
Did you have a doula?
I did have a doula.
Okay.
She came very highly recommended. She's very experienced. I think that it was not a good fit. I'll say that.
Did you meet with her ahead of time or she was just coming to your birth?
I met with her once ahead of time and she was like, do you kind of have questions? And I was like, no. But I mean, at that point, you don't even know what you don't know.
Of course.
And I think a better doula for me would have been like, so if you're planning on not having medicine for your pain during labor, how have you thought about breathing techniques? Have you thought about meditate, whatever? And we just didn't go there. And I should say, I wasn't like, I'm going to have an unmedicated birth or nothing. I just assumed, right? I was like, this is how it's going to be.
I'm just curious because did you have a lot of friends who had unmedicated births or family members that you were kind of looking to them as these are the role models, this is how it went for them, so it's probably how it's going to go for me, or is sort of just the assumption?
That's a great question. So my mom had unmedicated births, vaginal births. My best friend at the time, my best friend from high school, had unmedicated vaginal births. She had her first baby in the hospital and then her subsequent babies at home. So I had those were my role models. I at the time did not have any friends who'd had a C-section. So even though I was 33, which is older than the average first-time mom in the US, in my group of female friends, I was one of the first ones to have a baby. The people who'd had babies before me had all had unmedicated vaginal births, I think. Maybe some people had epidurals. No C-section.
So that almost like painted the picture of why
Exactly.
you had this idea of how your birth would go.
Exactly. And there was like one person who I was good friends with who at work who'd had a baby the year before me. And I was like, oh, it's just going to be like that.
Yeah.
Right.
We have so much in common.
Yeah. Yeah. It was funny because
ridiculous.
my colleague at work, my first baby was breech, and that's why I had a planned C-section. And she was pregnant just the year before me and she had a breech baby. And so in a way, it helped me feel more normal because I had that person very close in my life that will happen to her, so happen to me. It makes sense. We are surrounded with, I think, definitely shapes a lot of our thoughts about things as well.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
So talk us through, were you full term? Did you go into labor at home? What happened?
So I first went into labor. So I should say, let's see. I first went into labor and I didn't realize it was prodromal labor. Like my contractions never got regular. And I went in for a labor check and my doula met us there. And it kind of became clear that, this is quote unquote false labor. And that's one thing I think people really need to be educated about because no one had mentioned this to me. And now I'm like, it's happened in both of my labors and it's not uncommon. And, she kind of suggested that I take, along with, the physician I saw, that I take something to calm down my body, so to speak. It was
Okay.
basically like a Benadryl. And they did it on stress test and everything was fine. And I wasn't even at 40 weeks yet. And then at 40 weeks on the nose, I went into labor in the middle of the night. And I knew that was the real thing because it was extremely painful. And then you just kind of know, like, I sometimes think about like, my daughter's kind of interested in how do you know when to call 911? How do you know when it's an emergency? And I was like, well, you kind of know. And you don't need to know because you're a kid. The grown-ups around you will know. You just kind of know.
It's also that gut feeling that, like, why do people suppress when you have a gut feeling? They're like, oh, it's fine. Don't worry about it. But there's a reason why my body is alerting me in this way at this time. And it just is going to keep nagging at me, especially for women. Like, if people just acknowledged our gut feelings and didn't make us feel like we're being crazy for feeling this way, I mean, that in itself would probably make a lot more people's birth stories less traumatic. Because there was probably something there the whole time that was just nagging at them.
I totally agree with you. And it's so interesting because I think about how for so long in my life, and I don't think I'm unique in this way, right? And this isn't like because of some terrible thing. This is because I grew up as a woman in America. I became accustomed to hitting silent on the internal alarm.
100%.
Right? And like to some extent, you need to do that to move through public space because like a young woman taking the subway late at night, you can't be like the whole time because you have to get home. But we are trained into thinking, oh, I'm being oversensitive.
Right.
Oh,
You don't want to be the
I'm
crazy woman, right? Yeah.
exactly. And it's like, no, there's something really important that my body's trying to tell me. Totally.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So now you're 40 weeks and strong contractions. They're painful. So you go back into the hospital. Your doula meets you there again, I guess.
Yeah, she met us at the doctor's office. They did a labor check. They're like, you're 2 centimeters dilated. My doula tried to kind of hold us off from the hospital for a while. We like got snacks. And we got there and the contractions were unrelenting. Like everything I had read and the birth class I'd taken had said like, you need to call when you're at like 511. And it was every minute. But I
so close
wasn't
together.
dilating.
And it's
Oh my
so
gosh.
different when they are so close together because you don't get a break.
No, you don't have that
And
recovery.
that makes it so much harder. So they admit you for labor.
They admit me. They tell me first we're kind of like hanging out in my room and I'm like, this pain is really a lot. And I am a pretty calm person. I have like a really strong container or whatever. My son and daughter do too, by the way. Like my son, when we took him to the eye doctor the other day and he's like, yes. No. Like it's just like, just how we are.
Yeah.
And they had me get in the birth tub and I was like, I want an epidural. Like I knew, like I'm like, this is just too much. Yeah. And the anesthesiologist was not available. So I went in the birth tub to wait. And I just remember like looking at that clock and they were like, he'll be ready. He'll be here in an hour. And I was just like, how am I
It's a
gonna
long
get through
time, by
this
the way.
hour?
I like to point
Yes, it is.
things out when I
Please do, Dr. Jen.
when I spot them. That's too long.
It's too long.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is something people don't know, right? Is the availability of anesthesiologists. It's not the same at all hospitals.
Exactly.
And you don't always have a choice of where you're going to have your baby, but that's really important. Are you going to be waiting? Is there somebody who's dedicated specifically to obstetrics? Like, what's the situation?
Right. So at least you can be prepared or know, maybe you're going to ask a little earlier if it's going to take a longer period of time or whatever it is. So important to know. Okay.
Yeah.
So an hour passes. You're trying to to get a little comfortable
like,
in the
hanging
tub.
on the side of it.
The tub's not helping.
Closed eyes. Like, I went into the deep place you go into, I think, when you're in labor. And, when he first came, it didn't fully work, which was another thing that I didn't know and
Interesting.
is common,
Okay.
right? Then I was hooked up to the electronic fetal monitor, and then the doula and the nurse were like, wow, those are like monster contractions. I'm like, I know. That's what I've been saying.
Do you see my face?
Like, I can't even talk, And so eventually he had redid it a few times, and then it was working.
Eventually,
The
you
epidural.
got it working
Yeah.
for you. Okay.
Yeah.
So finally, you're feeling comfortable. What's your headspace like at that point? Do you remember?
I was really freaked out because I wasn't dilating. And I think the reason I wasn't dilating is because I was in so much pain.
Did they recheck you after the epidural?
They had me rest and then they checked me. But before that, they were like, have you had any, maybe you can't dilate. Like suddenly.
Like, already they're putting that kind of thought in your mind?
It was really like, oh, maybe, I'd had a colposcopy in college.
Okay.
And so which I
same.
hadn't ever hidden from anybody, right? And like all my records, right? And they're like, well, maybe you have scarring on your cervix and that's the problem. And I just remember being like, why are we talking about this now?
Yeah.
For the first time. And then I rested. And when they came back, my water had broken and I was dilated to like an 8 or a 9.
Are you
But
still comfortable with the epidural? Sorry, I'm going to ask you a lot of
Yes.
anesthesia questions.
Yes. yeah, at that point.
Okay,
yeah,
you're
I
still
was
comfortable. You finally started to dilate. Your water broke,
Yeah.
8 or 9. Okay. That sounds reasonable.
Good.
Something is
And
going to go awry at some point.
something's going to happen. But I was not emotionally though. I felt really like uncared for. I was scared.
Mhm.
Things already were not going the way that I had expected in terms of the pain, in terms of how long it took to dilate, which actually in retrospect wasn't that long, right? But like I wasn't dilating when labor was really getting going. When I was giving this epidural and it was finally working and my care provider stepped out, then they were like, if you don't dilate, you're going to like need a C-section. That made me feel like I had messed up.
Right.
And there's a way to share that information with somebody, but it was also premature, right? We're talking about at that point, it was probably 6 o'clock in the evening and I'd been admitted around 1.
PM or AM?
Yeah.
1 p.m.? And so you
Yeah.
went from 2 to 8 from 1 p.m. to 6
Very
p.m.
quickly.
So that's
Yeah.
actually very quick. And they've already mentioned something about scarring, which is, I think it's ridiculous. I mean, sometimes with LEAP, but that's pretty rare. And
it was just too short, right? Like it was like I
It's
should say, so
just
1 to
too
6 p.m. I
short.
hadn't really dilated. Then the epidural is working, and then between 6
Okay.
and 8 p.m. I dilated really quickly.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
And
also a piece of it that I think is so interesting is that like the emotional component, that when people are
Yes.
not recognizing how important that support is, that is a big piece of this whole puzzle, especially when you're being told things that maybe you're not even having time to really process. And when
Yeah.
you're in pain, we process information so incredibly different too, that had to contribute to this spiral effect that started happening for you.
And it
Absolutely.
started with them making you wait so long for the epidural to begin with. From the beginning, you're a bit dismissed,
Mm-hmm.
or they're
Mhm.
not able to provide what you need and when you need it. And so that's sort of starting the ball rolling too.
And also not realizing until I got onto the monitor, like, oh, these contractions are so intense. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, I wasn't screaming, I wasn't crying, but I was in so much pain. And I think like that's part of it too, right? Like if you were to objectively assess me, maybe you'd be like, she's fine or not
Right,
fine.
because you
she's
weren't
tolerating it.
screaming almost.
Exactly.
You're like, do I
Right.
need to scream? I talk about, I had very bad pain after my C-section. And it was sort of like, what do I need to do to prove to you that what we're doing is not working, that I am very, very uncomfortable. And it's sort of sad that we can't just
Verbally say something. We have
Right,
to
and-
like emotionally get unraveled for us to be taken seriously. And that in itself in the birth space is so incredibly unfair.
and it's gone too far at that point,
100%.
usually.
Absolutely. Yes.
So
Yeah.
I have, sorry, one more question about the
No,
epidural.
not at all.
because so
Yeah.
would they put it in
Mhm.
and then did they have to come back and give you extra doses to make it work?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. Because we're also thinking about ultimately the way that the story ends up is we have a situation where you had inadequate anesthesia during your
Which
C-section.
I think was I think the spinal, I think it was just a bad block with that to begin with. I mean,
Yes. So
Right.
it's not totally abnormal to have to redose an epidural, but it sounds like that's usually more normal if you're comfortable at the beginning and then something along the way changes the baby's moving down, things are happening where, okay, now we're sort of hitting different nerves and we need a little extra. That's one thing. But it seems like for you from the beginning, they're just adding, adding, adding. It was very difficult to get you to where you needed to be.
Yeah, and then you think about like what was going on then with the provider. Like, was he having an off day? You know, like he had a good reputation. You could be like, is it my anatomy? I mean, maybe, but you know, spoiler, I had an epidural for my second birth and it was one and done
So
and
curious about that.
fantastic, right? So, and it was
Yes.
with a different provider, right? So
Right.
that also makes me be like,
I think
okay,
it's things happen, you know, it's a blind procedure. And so,
totally.
I mean, I feel like I'm pretty good at them, but it's not like every single one was always perfect. But the more important thing is to recognize when for some reason, this one's not quite right.
That's
And
right.
we can always replace it. And one of the best reasons to do that early, other than that we did a procedure on someone that isn't really helping them and it's preventing them from, you know, going to the bathroom normally or any of the little things that change the course of your labor if you have an epidural. And so we owe it to that person, but particularly because anyone can end up with having to have a C-section.
Mhm.
And if we have that epidural in place, making sure that that's working is just kind of bread and butter for what we do. Okay, so now you have gotten to 8 or 9 and they're
Mhm.
already talking C-section. Are they explaining to you why? Because
Oh, at this point, they're not talking C-section. Then
okay.
they're saying like, okay, like then the room gets really busy, and I think it's at my actual due date at that point, like 1 o'clock in the morning or after midnight at some point, and they're asking me like, do you feel the need to push? And
Okay.
I felt nothing. I think the epidural at that point was like too much,
Too much.
right?
Yes.
I felt
Yes.
nothing,
Like, could you move your
and
legs? Were your legs kind
no,
of dead? Yeah.
my legs were dead. And so I said, no, but like I'll try. You know, like tell me what to
Yeah.
do.
So you were fully
And
dilated, I guess. They
I
wanted
was
you
fully
just
dilated, and then my daughter was having heart rate decelerations. So, I can't recall how long that was. I don't think I was pushing for very long, though. In my record, I think that they saw meconium, but I'm not certain if they saw it before the C-section, but they may have.
Mhm.
And the midwife was like, "It's time to do a section." So, at that point, I was just, like, so tired, right? I, like, have not eaten in 24 hours. I've just left
Well,
early in 24 hours, and now I'm like, "Whoa, I'm having like, this is the outcome? I'm having a C-section?" Like, whoa.
Yeah.
I
That's sort of been threatened before, and then not, and that again, like, I just n nobody mentioned anything over the course of my prenatal care, like, here's what happens in a C-section. Like, what had been mentioned to me during my prenatal care was like, "Have you thought about having a home birth? You're a
right.
good candidate for that." Quite the opposite. Nobody would
Yeah.
suggest that to a mom who they're thinking might need, more higher level of care during her birth.
And
It's one of the things that probably drives me the most crazy because I created a C-section course because I sat through a birth class and she didn't talk about it once. And I knew in that class I was having a C-section. And to the point that my husband was like, can we just leave? Like, why are we even sitting here? This makes no sense to be here right now. And you're not going to raise your hand and say, I'm having a C-section to even have her begin speaking about it. That was my aha moment of like, what a disservice that we are doing for these women. This is actually really going to send anybody into panic mode because you're not even talking about it.
Absolutely, and you should not be learning about it for the first time when you're going to your C-section. That is
No.
not the time.
It's also unfair for your partner who then has no time to cope or help you start having coping mechanisms for now what this experience is going to look like for both of you and how can they support you in this situation because now they're fearful of like I don't know what to do. I don't know even where to
Totally.
go in the room. I guess someone was just going to tell me what to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, and if they've been trained to be like, "Okay, apply pressure to her back during the contractions," and suddenly it's like, I don't know,
yeah, what now?
yeah.
Okay, so they're having the conversation with
So
you.
having the
Yeah.
conversation and it's time, and I sign something which I didn't read, and then we go in to the OR.
Did you have the same anesthesiologist this whole time?
I did, and I would say, like, I think one thing that's important to say is if let's say, like, that the exceptional part of my story ends there, and I have a C-section, and it goes well, and everything is fine, I would still come out and say, "That was not a good birth," because I
Mhm.
felt unsupported, because I didn't feel respected, I didn't feel heard, I didn't feel safe psychologically, I think that experience is way too common,
Yes.
overall in birth. And, what was very routine up until that moment for my providers wasn't routine for me at all. It was the first baby, and I was unprepared for a C-section and all of this. So
Mhm.
things got worse, once I
Yeah.
got into the OR, but they weren't good to begin with, right?
Right.
And I think that's really important. And it's like to your point that we don't prepare moms. What a disservice we're doing to moms and for
Mhm.
moms by not telling them about C-sections beforehand. And also by not listening to them. What I really needed was somebody to be like, I hear that you're really scared. I mean, I should say, like, when I think once they called the section, I was like really worried I was going to die. I was like, I'm afraid I'm going to die. I'm afraid my baby's going to die. I was really, really scared. And my husband told me later that he felt that the vibe in the room was that I was crazy, and like
Mhm.
hysterical. And I may have been hysterical, but I was hysterical because I was really scared.
And you're
And
allowed to be hysterical in those situations that you now feel out of control of the situation. You
yes,
feel out of control of your body. You don't have anybody validating what you're
exactly.
feeling. And now you're going into this unknown room. And now you are completely giving over. Every sense of
Exactly.
yourself is now in control of the medical team.
And I was reassured, right? People said, like, you're going to be fine. Your baby's going to be fine. You're going to be okay. But that's different than validating,
Of
right? Like,
course.
I hear that you're really scared. And if people had taken a pause, I think, and unfortunately, this is a lost opportunity for my doula at the moment, they could have seen, like, this person felt not listened to and she came in tremendous pain, was made to wait a long time for an epidural. No wonder she's scared. Nobody's listened to her the whole time. And now you're going to operate on her? Boy,
Right.
maybe she's not hysterical. Maybe she's really smart,
Right. It's a
Like,
very good point.
Did anyone ask you how you were feeling or validate? We know that this wasn't what you wanted, but we're going to do everything we can for you in this moment.
not that I remember. It's
Yeah.
possible, but I don't remember.
So you're going in super scared. Is your husband then separated from you as you're going back?
Yes. Yes. So in the OR, when I was given the spinal,
They did another
yeah,
anesthetic on you.
they did a spinal. So I had to like sit up and brace,
Mhm.
So they knew
the
that your epidural
would not
was not
probably cut it, which is
working,
good, right? That's
which
like
is
a good,
good. Yes. And yet, okay, so you sit up again for this new anesthesia. Did anyone explain why they were making these choices? Or at that point, were you confused why they couldn't use your epidural? Or you just didn't know anything
no,
about
I didn't know
anything
anything.
about that?
I didn't know anything.
Yeah, I'm trying to, of course, I could never know what happened to you, but I just can't help but try to guess. And it's very hard to know how much to give when you're giving a spinal on top of an epidural. I try actually not to do it because I'm just a super cautious person and I'd rather do another epidural and kind of slowly dose it. But this is the problem. If you do a spinal on top of an epidural, if you give too much and you already had some kind of block because your legs were heavy, then you can get a high spinal, very dangerous. But then if you don't give enough, well, what are you going to do? There's nothing else to do at that point. A spinal is just a single injection, one and done. With an epidural, a second epidural, then they could have just given more and more until they reached the point where you were actually comfortable. So they do the spinal, they lay you down. I just have to ask this other question. Did the anesthesiologist check your anesthesia in any way?
I don't
Or,
think so.
yeah,
And I don't, so I have to say, at this point, my memory is like,
I know it's so
oh,
hard. Do the best
it's
you
not
can.
perfect.
Yeah.
And I have no recollection of that. And that's standard of care, right? You're supposed to check with cold, right? You're supposed to check with pinching. You're supposed to,
It
right?
should be standard of care, but I think it's not done.
It's
Do you
not done
remember,
enough.
Bethany,
Yeah.
if it was done for you?
I
For,
do because I wanted to be talked through my C-section. I mean, also I was in the mindset of knowing I was having a C-section too.
Hmm.
So I do remember saying like, we're down doing the test. Do you feel this? Do you
yeah,
feel
but
that?
that was the OB, the anesthesiologist before they put the drapes up, I don't think did for you.
I don't think so. Not that I can recall.
Because
I don't know.
especially in a more emergent situation, once you have the drapes up, you're so close to starting the surgery. You don't have
Yeah.
time to make other choices before you're actually ready to start the surgery.
No,
So
I'm going to really think about that.
that's a kind of a just an important point to bring up because I want people to know that the anesthesiologist should be doing that. And maybe if they're not, you
Ask.
can bring it up,
Mhm.
which I know I just heard you on another podcast talking about how it's so hard for people to advocate for themselves and we shouldn't be asking, but it's almost like all we have until everyone changes over and becomes this new generation of of healthcare providers who are caring so much more and
Yeah.
really understanding, especially with OB anesthesia, how this is a very specific field and not everyone is specifically trained in OB anesthesia. And so they may not have all this knowledge, but it is so important to avoid situations like what you went through.
And to your earlier point, I mean, that's also an opportunity for either a doula or a partner to step in and be like, did you check? Right?
Right.
That is a great advocacy thing that
Mhm.
if a partner is prepared, would know to ask.
Totally.
So they go to start your surgery. I don't know if this is still hard for you to talk
No,
about.
it's okay. I'm happy
Okay.
to talk about it. Yeah. So I go to start my surgery and I said, I felt that. And the obstetrician said, you'll feel pressure. And I said, I felt that. And then he kept operating. And it was clear right away that I was in intense pain. What I think happened is that I should say this. I now understand because of other work that I've done that sometimes pain relief can wear off during the surgery and a person can feel more pain, let's say when like the uterus is taken out and things like this after delivery. This was before the birth. I
This
think
was
this was from the
incisional,
incision.
sharp pain.
Yes.
Yeah. I call it the
So,
icky
yeah.
feeling when the organs are moved around, that it's more of it's just, yeah, it's uncomfortable. But if you're feeling incisional pain, like that is straight up
A huge problem.
inadequate anesthesia, without a doubt, I would say. So straight away, you're feeling pain. They're maybe calling it pressure and you're saying, I feel it. I feel the surgery. Did they speak to you about any options, what they were going to do for you at that point?
No. So
Stop
my
the
husband,
surgery? Yeah.
they should have stopped the surgery. And I should say I ran, so I live in a small town and I ran into someone who was present at the birth. I think like maybe a couple of years ago. So we're talking about 7 years later. Okay. This person has been present at probably thousands of births since then. And this person said, I still regret not having stopped the operation. It
Wow.
was not the OB, it was not the anesthesiologist, it was somebody else in the room.
To hear
Um,
that, how did that make you feel with digesting this traumatic situation? Like, did that hearing that comment that help in your healing?
it made me reflect on the fact that the pain of that experience, I'm not the only person who's carrying it. And it made me reflect actually also on the person who told me this was probably the one person who was caring for me during my birth who I really trusted and who was listening to me.
Wow.
It did make me feel, I guess, a little bit validated, but it also is like, but you didn't, right? And like this thing changed my life. And I don't blame this person for not stopping it. I think like hierarchies are very difficult to navigate, but I'm not a provider, I'm not a clinician, and yet I can imagine what it's like to carry a case with you like that. And that suggests like that, boy, if the OB had listened to me, this whole thing could have been avoided. The whole
Totally.
thing. And maybe it would have meant that I needed to go to general anesthesia, right? Like maybe they would have been like, you know what? We have to do this now. And it is a risk to the baby. We have to do this. Okay. I don't know what would have happened to my baby. I can't say because it didn't happen, right? They put me under general after she was born, or they should have stopped and been like, we're going to redo the spinal. I don't know. I'm sure that they gave me extra pain medication. You know, my husband said that the anesthesiologist kind of like jumped into action and was doing all this stuff. Maybe I have not looked at this part of my records, but they may have given me ketamine. I'm sure they gave me Xanax. They may have given me like other opioids, but it didn't matter. It just it just wasn't working.
Yeah, that's
You know,
not enough. That will never
No.
fix a spinal or an epidural. That is not working. That's kind
No.
of, it's a big point too, is that anxiety medication doesn't treat pain. And
Exactly.
people can need anxiety medication during C-sections because that can be a component, but that is never the treatment for pain. And any IV pain medication is not going to be enough for someone to have surgery without anesthesia, obviously. So they talk to you about these are the options, because this is what I would do if presented with a situation is I can try to give you something through your IV, or I can put you to sleep right now. Which would you like me to do? Because sometimes there are these funny gray area situations and the mom always knows which way it is. You know, they say, I actually I don't want to go to sleep. Let me try something through my IV. Let me see if it can cut whatever it is that I'm feeling right now. And then other people, they just look at me and they say 100%, I want to be put to sleep now. And I say, can do that right now. You know, in under a minute, we'll do that for you. So were you given options, or was it sort of just things being done
Oh, no,
to
there were no options. Things were just being done, and I was in so much pain. I mean, like, here is this person, right? Again, like, I go in to labor, I'm in a lot of pain. I haven't been yelling, I haven't been crying. I was screaming from the pain, and my legs were kicking, right? Like,
Ooh,
this was beyond what's your preference, right? Like, this is torture, and I'm not suggesting that anybody in that room wanted to torture me. People don't go through all of medical school and nursing school because they want to hurt patients. And it was unconscionable, which is why they should have just stopped from the beginning and been like, this isn't working. Right? Like,
right.
if it's not working from the very
From the
beginning,
very beginning.
then they could have said, look, this isn't working. Would you prefer to go to sleep, or we can do X? And that conversation didn't happen because the obstetrician did not listen to me. That's the key thing, right? Like, my story is extreme in terms of the pain I experienced. And what's totally not unusual and happens to women all the time is you say something and the person's response is basically, you're wrong about what you're feeling, or I'm dismissing what you're feeling isn't that bad. I mean, who but you can know if you're in pain?
Right.
Yeah, they're not in your body. That's like the number one thing. You can't tell me how I'm feeling this pain because you are not actively feeling it. Period.
That's why I feel like it's more of a yes or no answer. Even with labor epidurals, the goal is comfort, and is what I kind of like to say, because what's comfortable for you and comfortable for somebody else, I can't say. I don't know what that is, but you tell me if this is enough to make you comfortable or not. We can't make those decisions. We're not in their body. And who knows? I don't know the status of, the urgency of your C-section. It seems like if you're pushing, okay, that makes it a little bit more urgent than if you weren't pushing already, if you weren't already at 10 centimeters. But did they check the baby's heart rate before? Was the baby doing fine? Did they have time to make these decisions? I don't know. And also, I wonder why they waited for the baby to be delivered. I guess at that point, after they tried a few things, then they decided, okay, I've tried all these things and you're still in this horrible state. So now, or were they waiting for the baby to be delivered because there was some feeling that putting you to sleep? I don't know. Have you figured that
That's a great
aspect
question. I
of
have
it?
not figured that out. It may have been the anesthesiologist's preference or training or practice to
Mhm.
wait. The notes say that they were talking about general for when the baby was born. My daughter's AFGARs were 5'5", or not 5'5", 9'9", whatever the highest.
9'9",
9'9".
yeah.
Yeah.
I
Sorry,
was like,
not
whoa,
5'5".
5'5".
Whoa, bad. That'd be
Yeah, that's
bad.
bad.
No,
9'9".
That's a Nick the
good.
baby.
9'9" is
9'9",
perfect.
yeah, 9'9".
Yeah.
And like, again, I wouldn't wish anything bad to have happened to my daughter. And the gap between, let's say, decision to incision, right? So when they made the decision to operate versus when it happened was more than, I think it was about an hour. It was not like, okay,
So you
this
were not running
baby
down the
is
hall.
definitely not. Did she need to get born then? Yes. Did I need a C-section? Given what was going on in the hospital at the time in terms of, like, nobody was suggesting like moving around or whatever, probably. Was it, from my best of my understanding, again, as a non-clinician, like, super urgent? No. Did they have a minute to put me under general? I think yes.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. It's sort of that Swiss cheese model when we talk about adverse events in medicine, where it's all of these different things lined up perfectly in a way that led to what happened to you. Little micro decisions along the way could have potentially changed how it ended up ultimately for you.
And I think there's a lot of regret, right? I mean, the midwife actually said to my husband later, and then this speaks to your question about how urgently was this section needed. She said to him later, maybe the baby just would have slid out on her own.
Oh, 'cause
Maybe
how
we
does
didn't need to do
that
that section.
make you
It
feel?
really made me mad.
Yeah.
Like, I was
Me
like, well,
too.
why did you do this? And, I actually talked to him about that, and he felt like it was more sort of an expression of regret overall, and maybe wishful thinking. I don't think my daughter would have just slid out on her own. It
No.
wasn't, she wasn't aligned to slide out on her own. I don't think that that is true either. But it also suggests to me that, again, this wasn't like,
Well,
we're really worried about your baby's brain damage or something, God forbid, right? If we don't get her out right now, and that's why we're like rushing, and we're here
yes,
with you, and this is
an hour is a
terrible.
decent amount of time from
Yeah,
decision to incision, and
yeah,
certainly a long enough time to sort out proper anesthesia for you.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry you experienced that.
Yeah. Thanks. Me too.
So as the procedure was happening, were you even like aware of when the baby was born, or was the pain so intense that it completely almost like shut down your memory of
Oh,
that?
it shut down my memory. I
Yeah.
have no memory. So apparently when she was born, the doctor like put her right up to my face. And again, this is from my husband. And I don't remember. And what's really interesting is, I'm working with this group of obstetric anesthesiologists and obstetricians on pain during C-section. And one thing that's come up is about like when you do get put to sleep, if they're in a situation like I was in, will that be traumatizing for people because it means you miss your baby's birth? And that is potentially traumatizing. And I'm like, listen, I was theoretically awake for my baby's birth and I have no
It
memory
doesn't
of it.
matter. Right.
No, and it would have been better if I hadn't gone through. What did that do for me or for her, frankly, right? When you think about like what she experienced in her body in terms of like the hormonal effects, right, of the stress and the fear, I'm sure it didn't feel good for her either. And of course, I would want ideally to be awake and to hold my baby right after my baby's birth. But like, spare us both from this entire pain,
100%. There is this fear of, or not, I don't know if fear is not the right word, but this avoidance of general anesthesia is a good thing to some extent, except when you're in a situation like this where the other options are not working. And we need to be able to make that switch on a dime, basically, because there is absolutely no benefit when someone is experiencing that much pain. There's no other option. There's no other choice. So any talk about like little increase of risk for general anesthesia, this or that, none of that will ever outweigh the experience, something like what you went through. So that's a mindset
psychological
shift.
safety
Yeah.
is so important, right? I mean, it's like, it's part of safety, right? It's part of patient safety. Absolutely.
I have to ask too, this was incredibly traumatic for you, but also for your husband to be witnessing you in this amount of pain. Have you guys tried to work together to process this experience, or have you each had to process it in how your memory is bringing it back into your life? Kind of did that path come together? I guess that's my question.
It's a great question. So he felt really guilty for a really long time because he felt responsible for not having protected me, which I don't know he was in total shock. And what's interesting is like, I did not hold him responsible. There are other people who were there who I did hold responsible. I did not blame him. I didn't feel like he abandoned me. He felt when my daughter was born, they kind of gave her to him and like sent him to our room to do skin to skin with her. And he told me that he felt at the time really torn because here's his new baby and he's being told to leave, but like his wife just went through this horrible thing. And he felt like he really didn't know what to do and he kind of froze. For a long time, he just could not speak directly about what had happened. He would sort of just dodge it. It was too uncomfortable for him. We have been able, it's been a long time now. And like, so we've both been able to talk about it together much more directly. And he's been able to express that feeling of guilt to me. And that's really important, right? Like, and I can say to him, I don't blame you, but like, he still has that feeling. I really don't think, I'm sure he wouldn't like love me saying this, but I don't think that he has actually dealt with what it meant to him, what it did to him to see this happen, like as a man, right? Like to
He's a
his
man,
female
so
partner.
we're not surprised.
No, but like really, right? Like you're supposed to be the like physical protector. Like I was the podcast, but like I'm 5'1", my husband is 6 feet tall. It's not like he's this like big dude, but like that's the expectation I think to some degree he has of himself. And of course I have of him too. It's very different to walk down the street with my husband than it is to walk down the street by myself, right?
Of course.
Just being, straight. So I think that he probably feels like what right does he have to experience or feel trauma or, like secondary trauma or whatever from seeing this when like I'm the one who's had to deal with all of the consequences. So maybe, like the next decade he'll
maybe one day he'll explore his
when I'll be like,
feelings
I'm
on
done, your turn.
Yeah.
Well, something I thought that was so interesting that you said is that on your daughter's birthday that you almost had like this PTSD from your experience. And I thought about that so much. I'm like, where have we missed celebrating a mom at a birthday? And maybe it's celebrating her healing because she had a traumatic birth. Maybe it's celebrating that she brought this baby into the world in a different way, in a different mode than she had, anticipated. And it's like, why are we not giving that more attention? Why are we not giving that more weight? Because that day changes you. Whether you have the birth of your dreams or you don't, it's still this day as a woman that you are never, ever the same person after it. I've just been sitting on that so much. I'm like, how can we change that? What is the movement for putting the weight that it deserves on the actual mom on that day? Versus like, did the baby walk on the first birthday? Like, does that really matter? Or is it like a check-in with the mom on that first birthday to say, how are you still processing this whole experience? Because a year's not that long.
A year is for the mom.
It's nothing.
Yeah.
I always say that they don't know. They're
Yeah.
only one.
Yeah.
Right.
That first birthday is 100%.
But
for the
society
mom.
doesn't create that for us. They don't give us that feeling that we deserve that moment to be celebrated for what we did, who we brought into this world.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, when I see a mom and, it's like their child's first birthday, I'm like, congratulations, like you did it, right? Like
Yes.
at age
Yes.
1, it's like the likelihood of all the bad stuff happening goes way down, even like falling off a ladder, getting divorced, like things that you're like, how is that related? But of course it's related. You've been putting all of your energy and resources into keeping this baby alive,
Yeah.
right? You did it. Amazing, right? And
Maybe you're
sometimes
starting to
moms-
sleep. Hopefully.
Yeah,
exactly.
maybe
Maybe,
sleeping a
right?
little bit more. Yeah.
What? And that's not even, thinking about what the birth was like. So
Yeah.
I
Right.
100%. And I have to say, like maybe like a couple years ago, I went with my daughter we have like this town pool, and there was a friend of hers there with his mom. And it was this boy's birthday, and the mother had had a very difficult birth, and he was turning like 7, and she's still processing it. She's like, yeah, I always take the day off on my son's birthday and we do something together, and it's not really a happy day for me. I could tell that she felt like a little bit maybe embarrassed to share that. And she probably shared that because she knew I was working on my book, and, I'm like the last
Been
person
through it.
to, yeah, like, or like I've said, there's this art installation it's in New Mexico, the Lightning Field by Walter D. Maria. It's like a bunch of like lightning, basically like metal sticks in the ground, and attracts lightning. I'm like, I just like attract people's birth stories, even if they don't know what I've been
It's only going to get
doing or happened
worse.
to me. I'm sure. But, she takes that space, and that's so healthy, right? That she like recognizes that she needs it.
Yeah.
And how could we build
And
that
says it out
bridge?
loud too. I think
And
it's
says it
good
out
that she
loud.
was not just holding that for herself
Totally.
too, but sharing that with you. I think that's probably really great for
Totally.
her healing.
I think what
Yeah.
you're doing too is you're proving to people that you don't have to smile and be silently dying in the inside. And I think as women, and again, going back to like how we were raised, put that smile on, act like everything's okay. And that is setting us up for a mountain of issues that we're going to still be processing every year, instead of just you in such a powerful way used your trauma to heal yourself by writing it out and giving other women an opportunity to feel like, wow, I could say something out loud and that's not going to put me in the crazy world. It's actually me just processing it in a healthy way versus layering it up under a mountain that one day will explode.
That's right. And that like you can feel two things at once, even if they're
Yes.
contradictory. Like, I love my daughter. I'm so happy I'm her mother. And, boy, like her birth was one of the worst things that ever happened to me in terms of the actual process, not the fact that like I got to become a mother to a beautiful baby. And, I think that that's a true reality for so many moms, that they can feel grief about something regarding their birth or regarding newborn care, whatever. Maybe it's about feeding. And they can be like, I'm grieving. A mom said this to me the other day. I grieve that I'm not able to breastfeed. And I'm extremely grateful that there is clean water and good, great formula that I can give to keep my baby alive. Both of those things can be true.
Yes.
And we have to accept that and see that. Otherwise, like you're saying, when you bury it, it's like it will just come back to bite you. You just can't keep it underground forever. I mean, it's like a landfill. Like you can put grass on top of it, but, if you don't vent it out, it's going to actually explode.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I
like
I
that
love that
landfill.
analogy. Yes. I
Right?
do.
It's
It's like your mountain one, but better.
Yes.
Same idea though, right? I mean,
So Jen taught us this one word, skited, which is scared and excited. And I think I love
Oh, I
that
love
word
that.
so much, because as parents, as mothers, how we kind of live our life, like we're so excited to be parents, but we're so scared at the same time that we're doing the wrong things, that we're not, speaking up when we should. And we're always questioning ourselves. And that's why surrounding ourselves with good people who give us the safe space to be ourselves is so critical in life, and especially in parenthood. I mean, I would not be who I am without friends like Jen. I would not be a happy person because, my husband, he can give to me, but he doesn't truly understand what it is like to just be a mom every day doing her best and making a million mistakes,
We're not perfect, no.
No.
I think it's part of the job description also,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. So back to your story. I wanted to hear a little bit about your recovery and your pain management because I have some theories on this. How did that go?
So I had one of those like patient-controlled analgesias, I think
Yeah.
it is. It's like so I had
Into
one
the
of
IV,
those
right?
into the IV. That helped, and I was also given opioids to take home with me. And
Mhm.
the guidelines of that have changed. I don't know what would have happened in my case because I had such bad pain if I'd have been given them, because I know with good reason, right? A lot of hospitals are not giving moms opioids to take home with them because in some cases people end up becoming addicted, and
This
that
is
is a terrible outcome,
another one of
right?
those things that we can go too far in one
Exactly.
direction.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Great example of that. Yeah.
And I actually stopped taking them like pretty early on because I didn't like how they made me feel. In terms of like, I was completely whacked out. I just would fall asleep, like what happens when you take an opioid.
Right.
Mhm.
And I already felt whacked out, you know,
Mhm.
Yeah.
like emotionally.
Emotionally,
So
right.
I didn't want that. And I mean, I guess this sort of speaks to my pain tolerance in general. I was in pain and I was still moving around. It was okay. What I really, really needed was space to debrief with people probably who were not present at the birth, who didn't feel either guilty or like worried about litigation, to speak with me about it. But I was not counseled to connect with a therapist, which is really a lost opportunity because there's some interventions that if you do them earlier, they can prevent someone from developing PTSD. So,
Completely.
right. And that is like, oh my God. I mean,
So how
it
was
took
the
me a long
debrief
time.
situation with your doctors afterwards?
The anesthesiologist came to my bedside and apologized, and that took a lot from him. And I didn't know this at the time, but there is no law in New York State that would have protected him from saying that to me if I had tried to sue him. I would have been able to take what he said to a court and say, like, look, he admitted wrongdoing. In 36 states, there are these apology laws that protect that kind of speech. So he really came to
Interesting. I
me.
should
Isn't
know
that
about
interesting?
this.
Yeah, I mean, they're problematic for all kinds of reasons. But the point is, he came to me as a human, as a person to a person. I made a mistake, and it must have taken tremendous courage for him to do that, right? Like just how he looked and the
Was it also
yeah.
hard to hear almost the admission that this didn't have to be like that in a way? Or did it make you feel better?
It made me feel a lot better,
Okay.
because he was like actually the only person who kind of came to me, to my face, and said, "I'm sorry, that was wrong." A lot of the other feedback I got was one person told me like my body didn't handle the anesthesia well, like it was my fault, which again, like even if that had been the case, you blame the patient. I mean, that,
Yeah.
like that wasn't delivered in this way of like, okay, here's information that, maybe 2 months later or your 6th week or whatever, here's some information that you should know going forward if you need another procedure where you might need a spinal, right? Or you might need an epidural. Here's information, or here's what you might want to follow up on or whatever. It wasn't like that. It was like, this was your error. Your body made the mistake, something completely out of my
And
control,
that's so
right?
rare. And I do have patients come to me and tell me that they've heard that about them. And there's no, I don't know. We just have to say, okay, well, let's see. We're going to do all these extra things to make sure if that is somehow the case, but that's not something to jump to at all.
No, I think it was just defensiveness.
Yeah, that was
right?
defensive. Yeah.
It's defensive.
And it is blaming you. It is blaming you.
Yeah. Like, I'm like, okay.
Right. What am I supposed
okay.
to do with that? It's also when you recognize the power of the words and like a sentence when you've already gone through trauma and someone says something else to you that it adds that layer that you're like, okay, so now I'm left to blame myself. And now instead of just processing this terrible experience you've just now gone through, now you're trying to process somebody's words that are making you question your own body, and how this, I'm sure, had to lead into, would you ever even want to get pregnant again? Was this
Right.
experience so
Right.
damaging that it changed the course of building your family? And when you said that you had wished you had a baby in between the two, it broke my heart for you so much, because I can understand why you would say that 100%. I wish I could I'm such like an empathetic person. So when I hear things like that, it's like, God, I wish I could have just like hugged you or said something different to you in that experience, or that somebody would have shown up for you in that way, so that it maybe would have helped your processing of all of this sooner.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I mean, I think the recovery could have gone a lot better than it did. And I think there was a lot of defensiveness and fear. Also, what I really needed, I think, at the time was what happened was not okay, period. And like, here are 3 perinatal therapists
And
who you can talk to.
maybe, acknowledging, which I think just very clear to me, this is birth trauma, maybe even
Yes.
using those words so that you also know how to kind of label your experience. This is what happened to me, and be able to look for resources based on that, if that was kind of acknowledged right away.
Absolutely, which I don't think those words were ever said. The midwife had wanted to, when I came in for my like 6-week checkup or 8-week checkup, she wanted to take a walk together. And I was like, no, I have no desire to talk to you. I saw the OB at that, and he was very concerned, but I didn't want to talk to him either. Do you know what I like? I didn't, I'm like, I don't trust you. And I also like, think about that gap of time. Like, okay, so I had my baby. I had 3 weeks of leave. I
That's
negotiated
it?
with my yeah, I negotiated with my union to try to get donated leave from other people on my campus, and people I don't even know who they are gave their vacation time to me so I could they didn't know who I was either. It was all anonymous. So I could stay home longer with my baby. So that was like my number one problem, right? I'm like, I'm supposed to go back to work in 3 weeks. I can't sleep because I'm like zapping, right? Like,
Mhm.
I'm totally traumatized. I have this immediate fire I have to put out, which is this leave situation. And then I had like, this weird like bruise on my torso that we went back. I mean, it was just like, and then also my daughter wasn't breastfeeding well and was losing all this weight. So, all this stuff is kind of like getting in the way,
Right.
Yeah.
right? Of being able to even be like, okay, so I need to take care of myself emotionally. And I just kind of got back to it. And I think that what we were talking about earlier, like, this stuff will just explode. I mean, a couple of years later, I felt complete block in my life. I was like, do I not want another baby? What am I doing at my job? Do I want this job? What am I doing with my career? I felt like a human sized question mark walking around. Like, like, what? And people go through periods like that in their life. It doesn't have to be because you're traumatized, right? I mean, that can be actually very fruitful to be like, what am I doing? Who am I? What do I want? But
I do that all
I
the
went
time.
it's very it'd be very
Yeah.
helpful. I mean, that's like not, I feel like especially at midlife, I'm like, I'm another like big, but it's not from a place of being blocked, right?
Right.
It's from a place of like deep questioning and evaluation. And I was totally blocked. I could not access my desires, what I really wanted. I just couldn't even see them. And it's because I had to like get right back to everything. When I finally started talk therapy, I went in because I was feeling blocked, and after maybe, like, a couple of months, I was just like, "Oh, yeah, and I had this, like, kind of bad birth." Which is
Wow.
so
She was probably like,
she
why
was
did you
like,
start with?
"What?" I was like, "Okay, now I see.
But I think it's so
Okay."
interesting that you say that, because that's the weight that as women we're not putting on our birth. That you thought it was
Exactly.
all these other things. It was the work component, it was the breastfeeding component, it was the baby losing the weight. When the catalyst, what started all of this was the birth of your child. And then all of that just intensified the situation. And yeah, I think that like why we don't show up for women in a more positive postpartum supportive way. We're hoping that we're like moving towards this movement. It's continuing to use our voices to say, like, if we do not provide better for a mom, how do we expect this mom to be better for her children, to show up to work, to do what brings her joy? It's impossible. It's just not
Yes.
possible.
Yes, and during pregnancy too. I mean, like, I had this idea, which now I'm like, I cannot believe I had this idea. But I was really raised with like, this idea of like, yeah, you like work until you go into labor. That's like a good thing. That's like a source of pride, right? Like, I knew women who finished their final exams for their master's.
Are you sure you're not a
Went into
doctor?
labor.
That's very much our mindset.
And I like, I'm a hardworking person. Like I really, value a work ethic. And that's insane that you're like internalize that, right? I'm not even talking about like if you have to, you don't have any leave, you can't afford to take whatever. That's a whole additional problem. But this internalized thing of like to be strong is like I'm doing it all at the same time, not just doing it all. I'm finishing my final exams and I'm going into labor and I'm going to be back and I'm going to do my research and it's just like, why can't we take a minute to prepare mothers, say it's okay to rest, and know that like we're talking about how this is going to shape the rest of your life. Like this is the rest of your life. It's not even a
Completely.
marathon. It's the rest of your life and your children's lives.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm thinking about how short the leave was, and that would be too short after a vaginal birth. But I'm sure that that only added to the stress of that, knowing that you needed, even if, a lot of these pieces of your story, it's like, even if you hadn't had the traumatic portion of the C-section, but the fact that you had surgery, you do need that extra time, that extra leave, even more so probably than after a vaginal delivery. So it's just all sort of compounding things. The other thought I had was this idea of failure. And I'm wondering how much feelings of shame contributed to you not seeking out help earlier, because they were telling you how your body failed so many different ways, even when it came to the anesthesia. Did that affect your ability to talk about it at first or acknowledge the problem?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think I felt like a lot of pressure to try to perform being a good mom, which was actually hypervigilance. Again, I did not have that language at the time,
Right.
but I was like, oh, like every time my daughter made a sound, right? I just was jumping, which I think can happen for new moms in general because you don't know what's normal and you want your baby to be safe. But I remember my mother and actually my sister-in-law's mother both kind of being like, you can let her chill for a minute, not in a judgmental way, right? But like in the way that you kind of want like the older women around you to be like, it's okay.
Like, this
she's
is a step
okay.
above
Sit down.
normal, potentially.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah, like, and I definitely probably felt shame that, again, in my family, and I'm talking about like my mother, my sister-in-law, the other women in my family, nobody had had a C-section.
Everybody's mother-in-law. Was it your mother-in-law?
My mother-in-law didn't have, my mother-in-law had a C-section.
4
Nobody.
babies, including twins with no epidural.
No. Yeah, and so you're like, not only did I have a C-section, which is like abnormal in this community, right, or this family or whatever,
Yes,
but
yes.
also like I had the C-section that was so messed up that like people can't even talk about it because it freaked them out so much. So that unintentionally, I think, gives the feeling of like, whoa, this was so aberrant that it needs to stay out of the light of day. And I understand why people are freaked out about it, and they should be. It was terrible. And also, like, that just compounds shame and isolation. I don't think anybody was trying to like shame me,
Right,
know,
of course, yeah.
right? But also the language in the hospital and around of like, oh, your body this, your body that, made me feel like a monster. Like, what's wrong with you? And when I only realized this much later that I had this, I mean, this sounds ridiculous, but like I had this shame that this thing had happened to me and nobody had stopped it. Like there must be something really wrong with me that a room full of people would watch me suffer without question. There was no question of interpretation and not put an end to it. I never like sat down and had that logical thought, but I had a few years ago shared what had happened in my birth with someone who I really liked, and I cared about what this person's opinion of me. And I was scared to say it because I was like, what is this person going to think that kind of thing would happen to me? What does that mean about who I am?
So
Mhm.
dehumanizing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like probably, but sometimes if someone's been sexually assaulted, right? If they don't want to reveal that, like, what does that mean about me that I've been dehumanized in this way or I've been victimized in this way? And it doesn't mean anything about you, right?
No,
It means something
no.
about the people who did it to you, but it doesn't, a person's brain arrives at where it arrives. It's not
Which is why
logical.
therapy is so key. As hard as it is to dig it all up, once you start digging it up, then you can start picking away at all the pieces and recognizing that you shouldn't feel shameful and that now you probably surround yourself with people differently maybe than before this experience, people that were going to show up for you in a different way because you needed that trust factor back into your life.
Oh yeah. I mean, I did EMDR, I did talk therapy, and then that helped me get ready for EMDR, which is the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which actually there's a new trial that's about to be printed in the American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology about EMDR for birth trauma. So at the time, like there was very little research into, does this work for birth trauma? We know it works for veterans who have PTSD. Does it work, from war? Does it work for women who've had bad birth experiences? It was really, really, really helpful for me. And weirdly, this experience, I mean, it's like you learn a lot about other people when you share something terrible that's happened to you. Can they look at the dark with you? And not in a way that's like that they don't feel scared or they don't feel upset about it, but it's like, can they stay there with you? And I don't even mean like dragging them into your healing, but just like, do they jump to the next thing immediately? And that doesn't have to be about a birth trauma. That could be about a miscarriage, right? Or repeated miscarriages. That could be about infertility. That could be about, my so-and-so has Parkinson's disease and it's just really hard watching this person deteriorate. That could be about financial problems, whatever. Will the people around you be able to sit with that real thing that's happening for you? Or are they going to try to like, let's smooth it over because I'm too uncomfortable and say something well-meaning but ultimately harmful, like, well, at least you have a healthy baby.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, well, yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not helpful.
I know you can't go there, so that's an important piece of information I have about this person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At this point in our lives, everyone has to have something that they have been
Yes.
through,
Yes.
and I
Oh,
kind of don't
yes.
believe you if you didn't.
Yeah.
And so in order for us to all support each other, we have to be comfortable hearing about other people, and supporting them. And I think it's about being, an in-depth human, honestly.
Yeah.
It's a huge part of being who we are to be able to hear these things. And you don't have to relate exactly, but it's just very interesting. Just like you said, you were 33. I think I was 33 too when I had my first. But, depending on where you live in like New York City area, it might not be a super old to start having a baby. But as now when we're 40, how many people do we know that have had miscarriages or traumatic birth or a C-section or you name it, whatever it is, so many people have gone through things. And this is what life is,
Totally.
unfortunately, right? But
Yes.
Seeing the the light at both ends of the tunnel, and like how you can facilitate being a good friend to someone and being there for them. It just says so much about people. And I feel like as I've gotten older in life, I've really embraced it in such a different way. And I've had to let some people go in my life. And I felt really guilty about that for a long time. But then I was like, but they weren't showing up for me the way I needed. And to make room for people who do show up for you, honestly, like I feel like 1,000,000 pounds has been lifted off of me once I honed into that as a woman and especially as a mom.
Oh, totally. And I mean, you could think if you go back to birth trauma and birthdays, you want to be able to say, I mean, I'm in a different space in this now, right? And I couldn't have predicted that. The way I felt when my daughter was 3 isn't the way that I feel when my daughter turned 9. But, during those harder years where I had no control over how I felt on her birthday. I did not feel happy. I felt stressed. I felt sad. I would cry, not necessarily in front of her, but like, these were the feelings I was having. It's an anniversary. You feel it in ways that aren't even obvious to you. And, it's not like I was like walking around being like, oh my God, it's the anniversary of my birth trauma. But people who really know me and understand me would, in order to have that kind of mutual understanding, would have to sort of accept that, like, I love my daughter. Of course, I have mixed feelings about her getting older, as we all do about our children, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, oh my God, you're getting here.
It's very normal. Yes.
Is it right? And it also happens to coincide with this very difficult time in my life. All of those things are true, and none of them make me a bad mom. They make me,
no,
No.
we're all good moms.
know,
This
We are
is
all good moms.
my favorite mantra.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
are a good mom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Never
Yep.
forget.